from an ITGC perspective, there are certain areas which are really important, right? Now, the first one is, goes without saying, it is your access control, right? Your access control. And we'll discuss of some of these things in a bit more detail, and we'll see that how exactly, it looks like from an audit perspective and from practical perspective when we say that, you have passed an audit or we have failed an audit and whatnot, right? The other part is your change management, The other one is your backup and recovery. The other one is BCTR, which is your continuity disaster recovery. The other sort of things could be software development lifecycle as well. Again, if it is applicable to you, right? Oftentimes, it may or may not be applicable to you. So it's really important for us as a business to understand what our business does. One, of course. Second is that what systems do we develop internally and what systems are we procuring from outside of our organization. So those aspects are really important to understand as a business, right? Because again, when it comes to cybersecurity and information security side of things, everything is driven by the business, right? So what is the nature of your business? What are the different locations that you're operating in? How many employees do you have? What is the complexity of the IT environment and whatnot? And it really depends on a number of other things too. But to give you a view, SDLC may or may not be, sort of applicable here. The other one is your incident response, right? And then the last one is, it's sort of IT operations. I'll just mention it as IT ops, which would essentially entail things like your job scheduling, right? Your system performance, any sort of issue resolution or problem resolution, right? Those sort of things, right? Now, the areas that you see here is largely at a 30,000 feet. These are the areas which gets encompassed, it gets entailed into the broader picture of ITGC, again, IT general controls. Going back to the foundation or going back to the concepts that we discussed in the first few minutes, is that any controls which is predominantly used or predominantly that you see at a bare minimum in any framework or in any standard out there, and the controls that you see listed out here are the ones which you would oftentimes see listed out in any framework that you would pick out there or any standard that you would pick, right? Now let's go through one, right? We'll go through the access control side of things, right? It's one of my favorite topics, to be honest, and it is one of the key areas because most of the breaches that you would see, happening would either be fixed or they should not have the appropriate level of access as per their role or as per their responsibilities, right? Now, these are the key components of ITGC at a high level, right? Now, we'd have to deep dive into each of these areas, and we'd have to make sure that that we understand that what goes into these sort of aspects from an ITGC perspective, right? Now, when it comes to access control, the first and foremost important thing that we would be looking at is your user access creation, right? User access creation. Then we have got user access modification, which is essentially your role modification, right? Say that you have moved from a different business unit to a different business unit, right? Say that you were a marketing person before. However, you have now moved to being a human resource personnel, right? So you would move roles in that sense, right? The other aspect is that you get promoted, right? It's a happy times, Christmas time, we get promoted, and then we sort of get elevated access to certain applications which we didn't have earlier, right? So those sort of role modifications also come into play when there is a change in the role due to certain circumstances, right? The next one is user access revocation. And this is a classic one because when we leave the organization, when we move on, the access needs to be revoked and revoked in a timely manner so that, you reduce the risk exposure, you reduce the risk related to having prolonged access even after you have left the firm, right? The other one is known as user access review. User access review, which is essentially performing a review of all the three aspects here that you see that we just touched on a periodic basis, right? Now, the periodicity could be really defined by the organization itself, right? If they want, they could do it on a quarterly basis, they could do it on a semi-annually basis, or they could also do it on an annual basis, right? It's really dependent on the organization. In my experience, I have seen organizations doing user access review every month. However, only for certain applications. It doesn't really apply to the to all the applications which we really use within the organization, right? So it's really on the business critical applications, if you will, right? Um, then we have really got your then we have got your quarterly access review, or maybe my annual review. So again, it's everything that you see here, any periodicity that you see here, it's really dependent on the the severity and criticality um, of the of the application, right? Of the application, the business, right? So it's really dependent on that. The other key aspect in the user access review, in the access control side of things from an ITGC perspective, is to look after the passwords. Now, I don't know how many of you are across the recent Nest changes that they brought in. I think a month or two back, wherein they said that if your passwords are long enough, say that if your passwords are over and beyond 14 characters, you don't have to change password on a frequent basis that you would, as opposed to what we usually would see, in practice, right? In practice, we would see that companies oftentimes they would say that, hey, you know what, you need to change your password in every 90 days, right? Or in every 120 days or whatever, right? Um, Now, in that sense, NIST said that, you know what, you don't really have to change your password every time because it doesn't really mitigate the risk in that sense. So, you can follow this guideline wherein if your passwords are over and beyond 14 characters, you could, right? You don't really have to go through this frequent password changes. All right. Coming back to the point. Now, really the idea is that whatever password testing that we do for all the business critical applications or any application that falls under the scope of the assessment or scope of ITGC, we need to make sure that it follows the policy of the company, policy of the organization. Right? That's really important. Right. Okay. So these are the key areas that you would see from this controls perspective. There could be a few more, but from a broader perspective, from a high level perspective, this is what you would see typically in a user access review control. The other key aspect that you might see is segregation of duties, and you also might see a role-based aspect of a sort of testing, right? So again, it's really dependent that what we are testing, right? What we are testing, what we are looking after, and what is my scope of the assessment. So it's really dependent on that, right? Okay.